The essence of Agile development is inspect and adapt. If you're doing Agile well, then you're constantly inspecting every aspect of what you're doing. You're inspecting code, you're inspecting your designs, you're inspecting your stories, you're inspecting your process, you're inspecting how your iterations go. And then you're evaluating how are we doing? Are there ways that we can do better? You're talking with your stakeholders, you're talking with your team members, and then you are adapting. You change what you're doing with the goal of trying to do it better. And if you practice, inspect, and adapt, you will be truly agile and you will be truly improving.
I've seen tangible changes in our team since adopting the Agile methodology. First is a greater level of transparency in our process. This allows us to know how well our team is doing and where we actually are within a process. It allows us to identify issues pretty early on and to make timely adjustments. It also makes it easier to assess and compare past performance so that we're able to put in changes in our process to improve performance and to actually measure the results of those changes. Lastly, there's an increased sense of ownership amongst the team in the process itself and the things we work on.
The topic is Agile Service Delivery equals perfection, but is it really perfect? What's your take on perfection in Agile Service Delivery?
Yeah, I think we had a nice discussion about the title, and I think the title is, I think it's aspirational. Is Agile Service Delivery perfect? Well, in software, we tend to avoid superlatives like, perfect or best or whatnot. But I think to understand how perfect Agile is or isn't, we have to go back to where we started with Agile, which is before Agile, we were doing most of our work in a waterfall mode, and waterfall mode, had some strengths, but also had some weaknesses. And I think what we saw was that as companies tried to do waterfall by the book, they tried to do it well. What really happened was that there just wasn't that much. If you followed the instructions perfectly, it still didn't quite work. And so you could follow the instructions perfectly, and there were still failure modes. And in particular, I think one of the failure modes of waterfall was what we call creeping bureaucracy. And so, you would have some substance to what you were doing, and then you would basically get buried in paperwork and process and so on. And so really what we were trying to do as we moved to Agile was try to strip away some of the bureaucracy, keep some of the essence of good practices that weren't overwhelming, and move towards something where we could just basically spend a lot more time getting work done, hopefully without increasing the amount of mistakes that we made. But I think what we found was that we needed a way to spend more time getting actual work done. And so I don't know that I think Agile Service Delivery is perfect, but I think it's a lot better than where we started or where we were 10 to 20 years ago. Tamik, what have you seen? Do you think Agile Service Delivery is perfect, or how much better is it?
Well, I don't believe it's perfect. In my experience, adopting an agile approach, there's still some hurdles that we need to get over. Agile knows it's not perfect. If things were always perfect, we wouldn't need to change, right? And at its core, the assumption is that there will be changes. They will never have perfect requirements, perfect designs. Being agile is acknowledging this and pivoting to ensure we can provide the value to our customers and clients.
Yeah, well, maybe as we talk about Agile being perfect or not, we could get more specific. I think that's a pretty good segue into the next topic that we were planning to talk about, which is why have companies adopted Agile Service Delivery? I mean, what's really better about Agile Service Delivery? So, Tamik, what have you seen? Why do companies adopt it? Why did you adopt it? What gets easier?
So speed to market, rapid feedback, continuous improvement, those are hallmarks of Agile. faster to market. Our markets and competitions are moving extremely fast. A product or service may no longer be viable or relevant if it is taking a year to 2 years to get it into production. Many opportunities can be missed, which puts companies at a disadvantage. They just simply can't wait so long. And these short release cycles, of course, lends itself to faster feedback from customers, the ability to respond to changes and make corrections much faster. Increased levels of transparency and accountability. There are a number of mechanisms in Agile, whichever framework or what I can call the mechanics you choose to employ in your organization. Agile teams are accountable for demonstrating their progress, whether it be through daily stand-ups, where you are supposed to be making your progress and of course saying what issues I am having, I need help. In those sessions, we also have sessions such as the retrospectives, review meetings. In these sessions, you're essentially asking questions. What went well? What didn't go so well? How can we improve? So the transparency is there. That segues as well into asking that question, how can we improve? Agile is about continuous improvement. One of the goals, you have the teams working together, taking time to regularly review what worked, what didn't work, actually helps to build high-performing teams, right? That was mentioned before about high-performing teams in Agile. The teams come together, they're utilizing their skills and incrementally to provide a solution, and that's part of the process. So simply inspecting and adapting continuously. Those are some of the reasons why persons would want to adopt Agile.
So I wanted to circle back.
I
wanted to circle back to a comment that you made at the beginning of that segment, which was about how Agile increases transparency. I mean, to me, that seems like a really big point. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
In terms of transparency, in a shorter life cycle, right? So you have a plan for a product or a service for your customers and your clients. With Agile and the feedback loop, that quick feedback loop, those conversations with our customers, that accountability, John mentioned before, that mindset, right? The team individuals being able to openly say, I'm having an issue. I need help. Coming together to work to get over those hurdles. In terms of the retrospectives, those dialogues with our customers to say the review meetings, you're presenting an idea and you're getting feedback. Oh, this didn't go so well. This is not necessarily what I want. But these things are done in short cycles instead of, as you would mention, in the waterfall where it's the long haul, maybe a year, a couple months before a customer even sees what was produced. So having these conversations in short cycle, putting problems out there to light so that the team can come together to resolve them is what is critical.
Yeah, I think this is a really big deal. I think it was too easy to bury problems in waterfall, and the checkpoints were much more formalities and less substantive. And so I think it was pretty common back in the day to see problems that would get inserted into the project or the release, but you wouldn't identify them for weeks or months. I think if Agile's done well, and it's not always done well, but if it's done well, then I think that incremental and iterative nature of it, where we're constantly pushing software to a releasable level of quality, and we're trying to keep quality high at all times. And then I think that the comment you mentioned of actually raising your hand and saying that you've got a problem when you do that, I think of that as decriminalizing mistakes, but just the idea that, mistakes are just part of what we do. What we're doing is very complicated. We're not going to get through it without making mistakes. And so the key is not burying them. We've got to raise them, and so we can fix them quickly. And I think Agile supports that. So I think the effect on transparency that I've seen is just that, it used to be that with more sequential approaches, you could pretend that you were on schedule and pretend that you were getting done for a really long time.
That's correct.
And then all of a sudden, 2 days before you're supposed to release, you have to say, oh, we're 6 months late. And that really, if you're paying attention on an Agile project or following anywhere close to the spirit of Agile, it just can't happen, because you're demonstrating progress on a much more regular basis, and everybody can see you're making progress, or you're not. Either way, the transparency is a lot better, I think.
And I remember having a moment. So I'm going back to the rapid release as one of the reasons. I recall having a moment, I think a year or two ago, an institution in Jamaica released an application. And going onto the application, the marketing involved around it, as you went on, they will tell you, we don't have everything yet, but here is this particular feature. And they were actually requesting feedback. So that institution was getting value immediately and still communicating that there's more to come. So you're looking forward to that. And you, as the user, you want the more, but you're happy that here I am at least getting something of value. And for that customer, that's winning for their customers. Yeah,
we seem to have spent the entire history of software development having this case of the best being the enemy of the good. And I like the way you just described that of we give them something useful, we get something out. It might not have been 100% of what they ultimately wanted. It's not the best, but it's useful and they can start using it. And so it's the good. And I think we've seen the same pattern repeated over and over in the history of software, which is, I think one of the reasons that waterfall was so problematic was this really idealistic vision of being able to come up with a perfect design and a perfect set of requirements and then implement it. And that's kind of the best. But I think my personal conclusion is that human beings are just not smart enough to design whole systems all at once in one big bang, or to define all the requirements all at once. And it's not just that we're not smart enough to develop the requirements. Our users and customers, it's not that they're not smart enough, it's that the act of developing requirements is a disruptive activity. We go through that process, it helps people learn what they want. And I think in the waterfall days, we would view that, we basically would be condescending and dismissive toward the customers and say, well, requirements are a problem because the customers don't always know what they want. And we ask them and they still don't tell us. And then when we show them, then they change their mind. And we would treat that as though the customer was the problem in that scenario. But I think really that's just the way that a discovery process like software development works. It's disruptive. And the act of taking one step opens up things that you can see and possibilities, and might change your mind about what you want that second step to be. So I like the way that, because Agile is more iterative and incremental, we can go about requirements development in a more iterative and incremental way. We don't blame the customer for learning as we go. And one phrase I like is, the customer has a right to learn what they want,
what they really want.
We have a right to learn how to do our jobs better. They also have a right to learn how to do their jobs better. So, and Agile supports that.
But one of the, leading into a question that I'd like to ask you next, there's always that concern though, Steve. Traditionally, from a project management point of view, you're talking about fixed time, fixed scope, fixed cost. One of the variables with Agile would be scope. So even if you have fixed time and fixed costs, scope, and I find that sometimes there's that fear because the scope is not fixed, but there's a reason for that, because you're discovering throughout the process. And that's what a lot of people need to understand and grasp. It's not, I have the requirements up front. It's having this iterative approach, and for each iteration, that involvement with the customer, who is the one using the software, not us, the developers.
Right.
Having those sessions so that you can get the feedback from them and know how to fix an issue quite fast, early, instead of way down the line. And it leads me now to another question I'm going to be asking you. What are some of the pitfalls you're seeing in Agile?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you set up that question very well. I think we've talked some about all the benefits that we get from Agile. Of course, you don't get the benefits just by saying the word Agile and sprinkling Agile holy water on your project. That's not enough. And I think we've seen over the course of the years, my company has seen a lot of what we call Agile theater, where companies will adopt certain words. They'll adopt the word Scrum or Kanban or Agile. And, one of the problems, I think, the last speaker talked a lot about, don't do Agile, be Agile. I think one of the challenges with the idea of being Agile is it's hard to look at a team and say, well, are they being Agile or not? We have to be able to observe something to tell whether they're really doing Agile. And if they're just saying the word Agile a lot, that doesn't really get them very far. I think the teams have to actually change. They have to do something different. If they do the same thing they used to do, then that doesn't, there's not going to be any benefit from that. I think one of the very common challenges that we see, and it gets described a lot online, is the idea that you've got a changed team. The team wants to be Agile and wants to change, but you have an unchanged organization. And so the idea being that, you train the team, you send the unchanged team, you send the changed team into the unchanged organization. And what happens? I think at that point, a lot of teams get frustrated, and then they think sometimes they become dismissive of their organization and say, well, we can't do this because the organization isn't Agile. We're Agile, but our company's not Agile. And I don't really like this mentality very much. I think it's a true description of the state of the world. But we have a concept that we like called the Agile boundary. And what the Agile boundary says is that in any given organization, there's going to be a part that you can make Agile, and there's going to be a part you can't make Agile. And you can always make yourself and probably your team Agile. If your team is 5 to 10 people or 3 to 10 people, you can make that part Agile. But there's going to be some point in your organization where you hit a boundary, and that part's not going to be able to be Agile. And you may be able to make your entire technical organization Agile, but then you run against your budgeting process. Maybe that's not Agile. Maybe maybe your sales department really isn't Agile. You could have your entire company be Agile, but maybe your customer's not Agile. And to me, one of the great ironies that I see with Agile teams is basically Agile. A big emphasis in Agile is about being responsive to the customer. That's really kind of the key is we're developing software in a way that serves customers better. And so if we start complaining about our customer not being Agile, then I think we've kind of missed the point. It's like, okay, fine, our customer's not Agile. Well, what can we do to actually meet them? Does Agile help us meet them? I think it actually does. I think Agile practices help us work better with a non-Agile customer. But we have to be realistic about the fact that Agile boundary is there. And then we have to actually be a little strategic in thinking about how do we work across the Agile boundary? Recognize there's an interface there. We're on one side of the interface, accounting or finance or customer is on the other side of the interface. So, so how do we work that interface? We're technical people. We like to solve problems. This is a kind of a problem that we need to solve. So I think I think Agile theater is a problem. Trying to, saying that you can't do Agile unless the whole world becomes Agile, I think is another common problem. We've seen quite a few instances now of Agile initiatives that get shut down because the team basically won't cooperate with the rest of the organization. So, the CEO or the general manager of the business area will come in and say, all right, we need estimates for how long this release will take or how much it will cost. And we've seen cases where the team just stonewalls that, says, no, we're not going to provide estimates because that's not agile. And I think that's unfortunate. We've gone into organizations where it's really clear they would benefit from a Scrum adoption. I mean, the situation just cries out for Scrum, but because at some point in the past, the team had refused to provide estimates, we've seen multiple cases where the top leadership in the organization has banned Scrum, even banned saying the word Scrum. And it's just tragic because it really would be a good solution, but somebody kind of, I think, misinterpreted how to apply Agile in that particular organization. And so now the organization is blocked from actually adopting it. So some pretty interesting pitfalls. I guess, if you don't mind, if I just say one other thing about pitfalls, is that, it's not 2000 anymore. It's not even 2010 anymore. And so the kinds of Agile practices that, as we understood them 10 years ago, 20 years ago, the world has moved on. The Agile world has moved on. And I think in the book that I published about a year ago, More Effective Agile, I talk about very much what Agile practices have proved to be effective and what practices, really seemed like they were going to be a good idea, but haven't worked out so well. And, there definitely are some practices and ideas, I think, that, seemed like a good idea at the time in 2005 or something like that, but just have really not borne fruit. And but we see, I think we do have a nice a core of practices that have worked out pretty well. So anyway, I've been talking for too long now. Tamika, what have you seen? I know you've got a lot of experience in this area too. So, what pitfalls have you seen as organizations try to adopt Agile?
A big one for me would be what we term Agile anti-patterns.
Mm-hmm.
A big one. It derails what would have mentioned earlier in terms of some of the benefits. And I can speak to some of them. And I recall my first exposure with Agile. It was in the early 2000s. We brought on Scrum. And we know the various artifacts. There is daily stand-up, there is retro, there is review, you name it. Anti-patterns from the point of view, our daily stand-ups end up being status update meetings. Really not what is expected in a daily stand-up. So going back to the transparency and the accountability, we mentioned what you're really dealing with is the day before, you committed yourself to something. The next morning, you're essentially having a discussion on, did I really complete that? And if yes, what am I committing myself to today? And also, I have an issue and around who can help me to get over this hurdle. When it becomes just a status update, all of that is missed. So we would get up every morning and have stand-ups, but the core Agile principle that you're trying to get out of this artifact completely missed. Likewise, another anti-pattern would be no retrospectives or delayed retrospectives. Again, the purpose of a retro is to look at your process, tying right back into continuous improvement. There are times when, yes, the question is asked, what you did well, what didn't go so well, but there was no follow-up in terms of how are we improving and actually having a plan for improvement. So you're following the prescriptive part of Agile and not really getting the benefits from it. So these anti-patterns can derail the purpose or what you're really trying to achieve.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, the way you describe that is the anti-patterns are in essence what I would have called Agile theater. It's basically just not doing the substance of Agile. And it's also interesting to me, bringing back that topic of transparency. one of the benefits of the daily stand-up, it's not the main reason you do it, but one of the benefits is transparency about progress. And, one of the, so I've been doing this for a long time. I wrote my first book more than 25 years ago. And, one of the problems that's been endemic in the software world forever is this idea of prima donna developers, where you get, some guy who works on some essential part of the system. Nobody else knows how it works. This guy's territorial about it and won't let anybody else access it. And the person is cryptic about their progress and hard to get a straight answer out of. And, for decades, this has been a challenge in software is, what do I do with this prima donna programmer where they're working on a core part of the system? I don't feel like I can fire them because they're essential. At the same time, they're very difficult to work with and they won't give me updates, and I never know when they're going to be done with something. And what we've seen is that problem just goes away with the daily stand-ups, because every day they have to stand up and say, here's what I'm planning to do today, and here's what I got done yesterday, and here's what I need help with, if anything. And what we've seen is either the behavior changes and they do start cooperating and giving you status and so on, so it's not a problem anymore, or they can't stand the scrutiny of actually standing up every day and they leave and the problem gets solved a different way. And so it's interesting to me. I mean, you go back to Gerald Weinberg's book, Psychology of Computer Programming, written in 1971, 50 years ago. And he talks about the problem of prima donna programmers. This is a really long-standing issue, and it just goes away from what we've seen, and partly because of the transparency and, and the specific technique of daily stand-up seems to help a lot with that. Well, I think that's probably a good point to segue into the last topic we had planned to talk about today, which is, okay, we've talked about all these pitfalls. Well, how do you overcome the pitfalls and how do you actually reap the benefits of being agile? So what do you think about that?
John alluded to it in his presentation previously. Firstly, you need to understand your why. In my opinion, you do need to understand your why. What does Agile mean for your organization, right? Is it truly helpful to consider adopting an Agile approach? What is it that you're trying to achieve by being Agile? So just doing Agile because it is the buzzword or because everybody else is doing, that in and of itself is an issue. Do you want efficiency? And then it's just a matter of how do I apply that to get these values, the goal, the ultimate goal. You mentioned earlier as well, you mentioned Agile boundary. That's another thing that a company needs to understand. It could be the entire organization, or it could just be the technical units, but it's good to understand your current boundary as well and where you may want to go to, fine? Not understanding your boundary can lead to difficulties and misalignment overall. You mentioned the case with an Agile software development team, but a non-Agile customer. How do you handle that? And while all organizations are different, there are some common challenges when adopting Agile. John mentioned some of those already. So understanding these and knowing how to clear them can make the transition easier. Company culture is a big one. So cultures that are in conflict with core Agile values. Cultural change is critical to successful Agile adoption. Successful Agile implementations need support from team members, management, executives to embrace this new way of working, completing work, relying on collaborating heavily. Roles in the organizations will be affected. People are averse to that change. What will happen to me, right? A possible way to overcome, John spoke to having the roadmap and to ensure that stakeholders have a common understanding of the Agile concepts and the benefits to the organization overall, setting up feedback mechanisms and involving the stakeholders early on in the process. And of course, you need to show and communicate the progress that you're making. I saw some comments during John's presentation about training, etc. Having inadequate experience in agile approaches is not a hurdle, right? Most new agile teams they're inexperienced in applying agile practices. Challenges will surface. There may be issues with prioritization, breaking down requirements so you can really have this iterative process and having things released to production. So you're dependent on that incremental change. But if you don't know how to break down those requirements to get that value in small pieces, that can be an issue. Overall, they will need to understand that inexperienced teams will need formal guidance. However, there shouldn't be a heavy focus on extensive training alone, but enabling collaborating, encouraging a learning organization by forming, and this is a term, community of practice, where you have groups of people collaborating regularly, you share information, you improving your skills and actively working towards developing in a particular domain. And another thing that is key, keep your teams stable, especially if you're just starting, because you need your teams to grow with each other, right? To mature and to develop that cadence, that rhythm, so that they can, in fact, produce that value that's required.
Yeah,
is there anything you can add to this, Steve?
Yeah, I like a lot of what you just said. I think in my book, More Effective Agile, I make the comment that if you could really distill Agile down to 3 words, I think the 3 words would be inspect and adapt. And you know, the idea being that in Agile, you're constantly looking at what are we doing? How is it working? You're evaluating. Is it working well? Should I keep doing it? Could it happen better? Should we change it? And then actually adapt. You know, don't just talk about it. I love your comment about teams doing the retrospectives and then not changing anything. We've seen that too. And so you can't just inspect, it's inspect and adapt. And then that becomes a way of life for a healthy Agile organization where you really can't help but get better over time if you actually are practicing inspect and adapt, because you're constantly looking at what you're doing, asking how we can do it better, and then actually doing it better. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't work out the way you thought, you know, guess what? You inspect and adapt again, and you just keep applying that. So yeah, I think, you know, to me, this is really the core, because if it cuts against the idea of Agile theater. If you're really doing inspect and adapt, then that's substantive. You can't really do, you know, you can't be accused of doing Agile theater if you're genuinely looking at what's working and what's not, and then changing. You know, likewise, you're going to be working for the good of the organization. If you're inspecting and adapting, you're not going to say, oh yeah, you know, the organization's unhappy with what we're doing, but we're not going to change anything. You know, you'll be adapting. And so, and I think one of the, not to drag the topic entirely back to pitfalls, but, you know, one of the pitfalls really is a failure to adapt. You know, getting overly idealistic and saying, oh, well, we have to do it this way because it's Agile. I really can't think of a less Agile attitude than that. You know, I mean, the whole idea of Agile is to be flexible and responsive. And so you get dug in and say, oh, this is the only way we could possibly do it. It's like, okay, well, somebody didn't quite get the memo on what Agile really means. And so, so I like that phrase. I like that phrase a lot, inspect and adapt.